Okay, welcome everyone to the CREDC webinar series. Today, the CyberSecureDashboard, Institutionalizing Cybersecurity Using the NIST Framework. My name is Randy Sandone. I'm the Executive Director of the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Institute here at ITI, a sister organization with CREDC. I'm delighted to be here. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers, Glenn Salo, who is the president, and Chantel Hoagland, who's a technology transition consultant at Heartland Science and Technology Group, a 501c3 not-for-profit technology company here in Champaign-Urbana. Glenn and I have been colleagues in one way or another for just over 15 years now. We both worked at SAIC and at Riverside Research together. And we've been working together on a variety of research projects at CREDC, including the project that developed the CyberSecureDashboard, which is the topic of today's webinar. Glenn is an electrical engineer by education and profession, having earned a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan, and a Master of Science in electrical engineering from our own University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Glenn is a successful entrepreneur with many years of experience serving diverse customers in both the federal government and the private sector. He has a strong technical background in electromagnetic phenomenology and wide-ranging engineering experience, from designing antennas for ultra-wideband radars and the development of simulation tools for lightning strike prediction, to computational physics, software development, web services, remote sensing, unmanned aerial systems, and web application development, and I'm sure a lot of other things in between. I'm also delighted to introduce Chantel Hoagland, who will be assisting Glenn today. Chantel and I also have been colleagues for many years. She and I were principals in a social media software startup and served together supporting CREDC at the Applied Research Institute here at the university. Chantel brings more than 2 decades of marketing communications experience to the Heartland Technology Transition Team, and she's participated in 9 tech startup ventures, all emerging from research that was conducted here at the University of Illinois. She now specializes in launch marketing for new tech ventures, working most frequently with engineers, scientists who have turned to entrepreneurs, and transitioning technologies from the end of the R&D phase into viable, launch-ready products. Chantel has a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from the University of Illinois. Please welcome Glenn Salo and Chantel Hoagland.
Thank you, Randy. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Randy, and thank you to CREDC and Dylan for the invitation to talk today, and for Tricia for organizing our meeting. Let's see, I need to bring this up on the slides. Yes, thank you very much. Today we're going to be talking about the CyberSecureDashboard. It's a tool to manage your cybersecurity processes within an organization and throughout an entire supply chain. The talk today is going to just cover briefly an overview of the dashboard itself, and we're going to go into a demo, give you a demonstration of the tool, and talk a little bit about how it might apply to other sectors like the energy sector itself. Before I get started, however, I do want to acknowledge our sponsors for the dashboard. The dashboard was initially funded with support from DMDII. That's the Digital Manufacturing Design Innovation Institute. They're up in Chicago. They're funded in part by the DoD. We also have funding currently coming from the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Institute, which Randy Sandone is the executive director of. That institute is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. It's a center of excellence for the Homeland Security, and it's managed here at the University of Illinois in the Information Trust Institute. In addition, Heartland and ITI have been working very closely from the start to develop this capability. Heartland's been the technology developer, and so what you'll see today is actually the web application that Heartland has developed. Initially, starting with in the project development of the dashboard, we had 3 corporate partners: Lockheed Martin, HL Precision, which is a small manufacturing firm located here in Champaign, Illinois, and Integrity Technology Solutions, which is a IT service provider located in Bloomington, Illinois. So, okay, with that behind us, what I want to start off first is sort of an overview or an executive summary of what we mean by a management tool for cybersecurity. And I've got the points highlighted here. Primarily that this tool is going to provide the mechanisms an organization or individual needs to manage all the processes of the implementation and the maintenance of cybersecurity. This includes having access, immediate access when it's needed to resources within the tool. And this includes documentation, which has requirements, security control requirements, for example, profiles or specific controls that are imposed upon an organization either by contract, government regulation, or some other mechanism. You'll have access to best practices from the industry, how to implement the different controls that you're required to implement. You'll have access to templates and policies. It'll be constructed or organized in a framework that's a logical, standardized way of looking at your cybersecurity. Instead of being a one-off situation, it'll be a standardized process that all organizations that are using the dashboard can follow. And in fact, it follows a national standard developed and published by the National Institute of Standards. The management tools allows you to monitor and report on the progress that you're making towards your goals and objectives. It has an artifact repository for you to maintain all of your documentation, an activity log, a historical activity log to record how your security has changed over time, links to third-party tools. It'll have ability to support third-party validation. And coming soon, within our current tool, we're going to have task management capabilities. And so that's just sort of a top-level view of the dashboard. I'm going to get into a demonstration of that very quickly here, so more details will be coming. The dashboard itself was initially started in support of DMDII under a request from the government to investigate how they can help small and medium-sized manufacturers satisfy the new requirements that the DoD has imposed on all DoD contractors. And those requirements were that any contractor, a manufacturer or any other contractor that has access or is using controlled unclassified information, they were being required to protect that information on their IT systems using the standards published in the NIST 800-171. And so our dashboard grew out of that requirement, trying to assist these small and medium-sized manufacturers to better meet that requirement, to simplify that process of meeting that requirement. From there, it grew into supporting more generically the manufacturing industry in general and other industries, and it's going through a process right now of being commercialized. The tool is available. If you go to CybersecurityDashboard.com, you can register for an account. You can go through a trial, get a trial account, and hopefully within the coming days or a week or two, it will be released as a commercial product. So the tool itself is intended to support the entire supply chain. And there's different needs throughout the supply chain. For the small manufacturers, for the small businesses, for the small corporations, they may not have the internal knowledge on how to manage their cybersecurity or even how to set up firewalls or things of that nature. And so they're likely to outsource that requirement to a provider such as HL Precision. But in outsourcing that, they still have a responsibility. They can't outsource the responsibility. And so the dashboard tool is there to help these organizations understand what the requirements are, to communicate and facilitate interactions with the IT provider, and to ultimately implement secure practices. The same thing can be applied to the medium and larger size corporations. They still have IT departments. These IT people might be employed within the company, but there still has to be communication and understanding throughout the entire organization with the CEO or Chief Technology Officer, the IT staff, the employees. And this tool is designed to help facilitate an institutionalized process of cybersecurity. It's not just a checklist of things to go through, but it's an entire process to institutionalize the practices so that the entire organization becomes a cybersecure aware organization. And in doing so, the tool itself is built on a set of standards. And so we're talking about having a standards approach to our risk management for cybersecurity. And that standards approach really helps promote a common language, a common way of communicating with internal and external stakeholders. So in developing the structure of the dashboard, we took the standards approach. And we have right now 4 primary standards within the dashboard. The first one is the NIST 853. For those of you not familiar with that, it's a document that has 462 pages, I believe. And it has a comprehensive set of security and privacy controls. And so it's like a big laundry list of different security controls that an organization could implement. There's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And this framework is designed to provide a logical way or standardized way of thinking about your cybersecurity and actually going about and implementing your cybersecurity. We have the NIST manufacturing profile in there. The manufacturing profile is one of many profiles that NIST is developing for specific industries. As more of these profiles become available, we intend to implement them into the dashboard. But these are profiles that are taking the cybersecurity framework and adapting them to the specific business practices and needs of different industries. The dashboard itself started out as a requirement to help organizations meet the requirement for satisfying the 800-171. So that standard is built into the dashboard. And we are working on developing, integrating the ICS standard developed by NIST, the NIST 882, which we hope to have released sometime early next spring. So when we think about cybersecurity, we think about several key aspects. Or we have certain basic assumptions, if you will, about it. One is that the cybersecurity can't be outsourced, right? It's an institutionalized process that involves everyone within the organization. Secondly, it's not a checklist that you go through once and you're done with. Cybersecurity is something that is an ongoing event. It's a recurring process, and it's an evolving process. As the threats change, as technology changes, cybersecurity changes with it. Cybersecurity is obviously a critical component within a business's risk management process. The same thing can be said of our country, right? Cybersecurity is incredibly important to our country when we're talking about energy systems or what have you. Our nation's security depends upon cybersecurity in this sense. And it's also dependent upon everybody in the entire link. You know, whether it's a supply chain or delivery of energy, you have to protect it at each stage or each link along the way. Otherwise, it doesn't do much good. And so, you know, the bumper sticker here, that cybersecurity is more than securing hardware, right? It's much, much more than that. It's an entire process. And so with this, I'm going to go into a demonstration next on the dashboard. I've got 3 use cases that I want to talk about. These use cases are manufacturing industry focused because that's where our dashboard is currently targeting our current target audience. It's easy to extend this, however, to the energy sector or any other sector. And as I mentioned already, we are planning on extending this to include not just IT systems, but industrial control systems as well, or ICS systems. So the three use cases I want to go through this afternoon, is the first use case that we try to address with our dashboard. And that's an organization is being mandated or has a desire to meet the NIST 171. For DoD contractors, this is mandated by a DFARS requirement. For others, it might be a choice. But the question is, what does this mean? How do you go about doing that, especially for an organization that might be new to this whole idea of cybersecurity? And then, perhaps most importantly, what tools and capabilities can be leveraged? The second use case is that, once you've reached sort of this minimum state of you're compliant to a given standard, what can you do to institutionalize this process within your organization? And so we'll talk about how the dashboard can help facilitate that within the context of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And the third use case is going to be, how do these cybersecurity controls or lack of controls impact your business process? And so with that, I'm going to go to our dashboard. If you wish, you can go to CyberSecureDashboard.com. As I mentioned before, you can register, create an account, and have a temporary account. I'm not going to walk through the dashboard and show you all the features one by one. I'm going to try to address those use cases. And the first thing we're going to do is take a look at that use case of trying to be compliant with the requirements in the NIST 800-171. And when we do this, the dashboard, when you log in, it shows you a list of accounts. And these accounts can be, if you're a large corporation, it could be different branch offices. If you're an IT service provider, it could be different clients that you're supporting. If you're a small business, you likely have only one account, one business. When you click on the account, we have different ways of looking at the data. Within the dashboard itself, everything is cross-referenced back currently to the 853. And so we have a standard set of controls in which we're looking at your cybersecurity implementation. And we can take different views of that data, if you will. And right now we have these views available, and we're going to start off with the 171 view, because that's our goal, is to meet the standards of the 171. And if you look at the 171 documentation, it's approximately 100-page long set of requirements, and they have 110 different controls that an organization is expected to satisfy to meet the DoD requirements. And what we have done is we've taken those controls and we've mapped them back into this dashboard. And so when you go to the 171 view, you can pull up the legend here and see the different control categories that are identified. And it starts off very obviously, perhaps, is that when you're looking at cybersecurity, you have to be concerned about access control. There's an awareness and training category, audit and accountability, and so on. There's the 171 breaks up their 110 controls into these 14 different families. And then within each family, if we pick, for example, access control, it has a set of categories or subcategories within that family. In this particular case, there's 22 of them. As part of access control, and there's the way the 171 works. It gives you these 110 controls, and then for each control, it gives you a one-sentence description of what you're supposed to do. Not a lot of information, and that's part of the challenge that organizations have. And I'll give you an example. The very first control, 3.1.1, limit system access to authorized users. It doesn't tell you how to limit system access. It doesn't tell you how to define authorized users. It doesn't give you many details at all. And so what we've done with our dashboard is we've taken a 171 view of things. We've kept the same organization that NIST has within the documentation itself. We've got the 14 categories, 110 controls. And then for each one of these controls, we've cross-referenced this back to the comprehensive list of controls that NIST has developed in an 853. And so right away, looking at the dashboard, you can see that for the very first one, limit system access to authorized users, we can see that it involves account management, access enforcement, and remote access type of controls. And so what we're doing with the dashboard is we're making it very obvious what you have to do. And if you come across on each one of these cards and just click one of these cards, what it does is it opens up the corresponding 853 documentation. And the purpose of this is to provide the user, the organization, with more information on what has to be done. And so instead of a single sentence description of what needs to be done, we now have a multi-paragraph, multi-page set of requirements that are detailed in the 853 as to what is to be done. And so, it tells you, assign account managers, establish conditions for groups and roles, etc. It goes through and tells you what you need to do. That's great, right? Because now we have more information, more details on our requirements. However, we don't stop there. What we try to also do is now give the organization some guidance on how to do this. Because even though the 53 goes in there, the 53 gives you a lot of details on the requirements. It gives you supplemental guidance. It gives you related controls. And within our interface here, we can click on a related control. It opens up the control, and so we can see the control right away. We can, in fact, look at multiple controls simultaneously if you wish. We can have a side-by-side view, and so you can look at the requirements for AC2, and at the same time you can look at the requirements for AC10 and see how they compare or differ. But in addition to that, we want to provide more than just a list of detailed requirements. And so our next tab over here provides guidance. And so what we've done here is we've taken industry best practices and we've associated those practices with this particular control, in this case, account management or AC2, and we've given a bulleted list of these are the steps or these are the things that an organization should do to meet the requirements that are specified in the 171 and are given in more detail in the 53. So in addition to that then, so now we have the requirements, we have guidance on how to implement those controls. We also then have a tab here called References and Templates. And the references and templates here will cross-reference other third-party resources, if they're applicable, to gain more information, or perhaps identify hardware that might be useful or software that might be useful for implementing a specific control at hand. But it also provides you with policy templates. Within the dashboard, we have 9 different policy templates that have been created. And the goal here is that we're telling you what's required, how to do it, and then we're providing you with the means to actually do it. And so a large part of cybersecurity is developing a policy or procedure. And so, for example, here we've got a technical controls policy. If we click on that technical controls policy, we'll be able to download a document. This is a document that now that the organization can use for their own purposes. It's ready for them to incorporate their letterhead, their company name, and it's already pre-populated and it's structured. And so it provides the type of information that an organization would have to have for a technical controls policy. And so the organization's responsibility now is not to develop this from scratch or to figure out how to develop it or to try to determine what belongs within it. Is to take this document to leverage what someone else has already done and tailor it to their needs. They can use it as is or they can adjust it as it need be. This particular document is 22 pages long. Like I mentioned, we've got 9 documents. They range in length, both shorter and longer than this particular document. So with that, an organization can now understand the requirements, understand how to implement that requirement, have a resource or templates or policies from which to begin that whole process. And then the next step that they do is they actually then have to go through sort of a self-assessment stage. And so with the 171, it is a self-assessment at this point in time. There's no government requirement for third-party validation, although it is possible that we can support that within the frame, within our dashboard. And the first thing we provide here, we provide 2 things. Once you, in this case, if there's a policy or that's required or procedure that's required, we provide a link to an artifacts page where you can actually upload documents to this page and then have that documentation always be there for cross-referencing. We also do this in a very intelligent way so that For example, the technical controls policy is a policy that's going to be applied to multiple controls, not just AC2, but there's multiple controls in which that applies to. And so when you upload it, we have the ability to link it to other controls. We can see here that we have other artifacts that are re-uploaded that we can link to this particular one. And when they're linked, everything is linked by title. So that if next week I come along and I change my technical controls policy, that is now, when it gets uploaded to the repository in the system here, every control that's linked to that control policy will be updated. And in addition, you'll be able to see a historical reference. And so right now I only have one version, but you'll also be able to see a historical versioning of those different policies and documents. And so with our artifacts, you can upload it, you can cross-reference it, and then you can update it and have that historical information. Then after you do that, after you've implemented your best practices, developed your policies, documented what you've done, then you can come over to your compliance. You can change your compliance level. You can say that you've gone from compliant or non-compliant to a variance or to being compliant. You'll notice that every time we do this, that the status changes on the dashboard. We also record in this sort of blog-style window here. Any change that happens when you upload a file or you change the compliance, it's automatically recorded in a history log. And then you can also add a comment yourself. You can say, you completed a technical controls policy. And when you do that, you enter it. It becomes a record in the log, and others can go in there and actually comment on that. And so if you have an issue where you're trying to resolve something, you can actually address that within here. People can comment, give solutions, what have you. So within this process, we can come through here and understand the requirements and one by one start going through them and satisfying those requirements. We try to make it very clear as to, we try to follow the standards and that have been developed by NIST in terms of the naming convention, in terms of the data that's available. And so when the user is using this, they become familiar with the terms and the terminology as part of that process of educating them to understand what they're doing. We also make it very convenient for them to see that what the status is. So we provide an overall status for this project. When you first create an account, everything is red because it starts off at a non-compliant state. And as you go through the compliance process, the gauges change to show you what your compliance level is. We break up the dashboard gauges, if you will, by section as well. And so you can go through each one of these sections and see what your relative status is for each section. And then within each section or each family, for each control, you can see the status of each control. And so that's kind of a quick process as an organization. If you just wanted to do this as a checklist, you could come through here and say, I want to do access control, I want to do awareness and training. You just start working through this one by one. You go through these controls. You open up the corresponding 53 control, understand the requirements, implement the best practices, and then do the self-assessment and just move on to the next control. So that's the very low level, I think, the minimum barrier you have to actually using something like the dashboard for being compliant, in this case with the DFARS requirement. But we want to go beyond that, right? We don't want to just treat this as a checklist. We actually want to start institutionalizing a standard within an organization. And so that's where we come to a different view of the same data, it's the same information, but it's a different view. And with this view, we have the NIST Cybersecurity Framework view. And for those of you familiar with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the Cybersecurity Framework provides several functions. It provides an ability for you to identify your current status or your current profile, if you will, for cybersecurity. It allows you to identify a target state, and it organizes the way you think about cybersecurity. And its primary feature right here is that it has 5 different functions that you should think about when you're thinking about cybersecurity. It's the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover functions. And I think these make sense. These functions are not necessarily handled sequentially. They're not a one-time and done with type of function. They're a continuous repeating function. But first you have to identify your systems, and you identify your risks, and identify your threats. Then you have to protect against those. And then you have to detect problems, intrusions, or other attacks on your system. When you detect those, you have to respond to those threats. And then after you respond to that, you have a recovery. And so these are the ways that the cybersecurity framework organizes sort of the functions or the processes. And what we've done here is we've taken this framework and we've mapped it straight to the 171 and the 53. And so if we start off with the very first element of the framework, and look at asset management, it pulls up a category called asset management. And asset management itself has these 6 different subcategories. And each one of these subcategories is now cross-referenced to the 171, which is cross-referenced to the 53. And so if you're having to meet the 171 requirement, now you can start thinking about how you meet that requirement in terms of the cybersecurity framework thought process. And so just like before, we have asset, once again, we're identify, asset management, and then the very first thing, we have to inventory physical devices and systems. And in order to do that, the 171 has 2 different controls or policies or requirements for how you inventory those systems, 3.41, 3.42. And those 2 policies are cross-referenced to these 4 particular 53 controls. And once again, you'd go through this, you'd understand the requirement, you'd go through the guidance, you would then implement these best practices. If a template was available, in this case it's a security operations policy, you would develop that policy, upload it as an artifact, and then score yourself for being compliant, assuming you meet all the requirements on that particular control. And you would work your way through this system. You can jump around as you wish, identifying which is the area that's more important to you. But all of this stuff is, once again, cross-referenced. The information you need is always at hand when you need it. The last use case here then is to take a look once again at a different view. And in this case, we're looking at the manner in which cybersecurity impacts the business operations. And so the NIST cybersecurity framework allows for these different profiles. And by profiles, once again, we're talking about mapping the cybersecurity framework to specific industries. So we've got implemented here the manufacturing profile, which has taken the cybersecurity framework and map it to the business needs or objectives of the manufacturing industry. And so it's organized the same way as the CSF view was for the 171. We have the 5 different functions that are embedded in the NIST cybersecurity framework. For each one of these functions, it's broken up by category and subcategory. And then for each one of these subcategories, it's now related directly to a risk level. And so the profile are based on risk levels. Are you low risk, moderate risk, or high risk based on your business objectives? You can change that as you change your risk level. The information becomes bold once again. I should point out that we always try to make the information always available. And so even though, like in this case, the high is sort of grayed out, it's still available so that even though it's not necessarily a requirement for you, if you're interested in doing something more, that information is immediately available to you. You can go through here and work at it, use it just as if it were a requirement. What the profile does that's really interesting, however, is that in addition to just adding that structure, it relates everything to your business objectives. And we do this over here on the right-hand side of the dashboard. For manufacturing, every industry is different. For manufacturing, they've identified 5 different primary business objectives. They've identified as human safety, environment safety, quality of product, production goals, and trade secrets. And what this view allows you to do right away is it allows you to see which one of your controls or which one of these manufacturing profile requirements impacts your different business objectives. And so, for example, if human safety was critical for you and was something that you wanted to focus on, you would right away see that, in this particular set of controls, that IDAM1 and IDAM5 are the 2 controls that are related to human safety. And so you'd come through here, you would implement the controls for IDAM5 and IDAM1 first to satisfy the human safety requirement. And then you could just walk through and do the same thing through these different controls, right? So for different categories, you'd have, go from asset management to governance to awareness and training, and one by one, work your way through it in the same process. But this way, you do know how this impacts your business.
Glenn, we did have a question that came in. I don't know if you want to take.
That'd be fine.
Are there any plans to cross-reference any other frameworks such as CIS, Critical Security Controls, or ISO 27002?
Yes. We haven't started those yet, but we recognize that there's more than one framework. We started with the NIST because we're in the United States. That's sort of the standard. If you're in foreign countries, ISO is a very popular standard, obviously a framework. And it's on our roadmap to implement other frameworks. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the short demo. If you want to go through and create an account, please feel free to do so. The temporary account does not have access to the policy templates. It has access to dummy policy templates because those are of monetary value. As soon as we have accounts that you can sign up for permanently, those will be accessible to you. So just to kind of summarize here, how we see the dashboard fitting in this whole cybersecurity process is that we've designed a dashboard to be a standards-based approach to managing cybersecurity. And as such, we've built it currently on the NIST standards, which includes the cybersecurity framework, the 853, the 171, and so on. We will be adding other foundational components as we go along in the future, including adding the industrial control systems to this. The dashboard itself sort of ingests, if you will, industry knowledge base. We're trying to pull in additional information, not just telling you what you have to do, but how to do it. So the best practices, the policies, the templates, the references, and so on. And the need for a cybersecurity dashboard or for a standardized risk management tool is really being driven by our threats today, right? We have severe cybersecurity threats. Those threats are driving a generation of numerous policies or requirements that are coming down from the government, from business owners, from prime contractors, from contracting offices, and even if you want to get insurance for your systems, you're going to have to meet certain standards. Likewise, those threats are driving the need for monitoring your systems, for updating your software, et cetera. The goal of the dashboard is to take all this information, this foundation, these best practices, the requirements, and enable a management system so that an organization can create the policies and the procedures that they need to institutionalize a cybersecure aware culture within their organization. And by doing that, become ultimately a compliant organization and an organization that's resilient to a variety of different threats. And so one of the key points I want to make sure we walk away with is that a standards-based approach like we have in a dashboard is extremely valuable in the entire communication process. Instead of having every organization going out and doing things their own way, or talking about it in their own way, or categorizing it in their own unique way, we can have a standard approach to how you do cybersecurity. A standard approach built on standards developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it's an approach that can to facilitate communications internally and externally with, like I mentioned before, prime contractors, suppliers, partners. It's very critical. We were recently at a conference at DMDII, and it was very obvious that with the manufacturers that it was very important that all the organizations work together to secure the data. Because if you're a prime contractor and you're giving out your drawings and your information to suppliers, they have to secure that data. If you're a government organization, even though you have a contract with the prime contractor, you want to make sure that all the information is protected throughout the entire supply chain. And so having a standards-based approach where everybody's sort of graded on the same scale, understands each other, follows the same procedures makes a lot of sense. And so just to summarize, our dashboard, we believe, is operationalizing a standards cyber security risk management process. We've taken steps to try to make this as easy as possible to use. We specifically decided when we started working on this program not to make this an application that ran on your computer specifically. We wanted to make it a cloud-based application so that everyone who has need to access the information can access, so that it's immediately scalable. We also recognize that some organizations may not want to use the cloud, and so we have a version of this that can be deployed inside of a firewall for an organization. The idea of the dashboard is that it provides all the relevant information you need when you need it. So if you're talking about a specific control, it gives you all your references to that control, whether it's third-party government references, best practices, policies, or templates. It's all self-contained, easy to find, readily available. The next bullet here where it says supports unlimited internal and trusted third-party access, that's by design so that you can share this with whoever needs to see it. It's for compliance sake, for sharing information, or what have you. And it is structured around the cybersecurity framework model. We believe that's a really good framework to build upon. And it's a framework that can hopefully streamline the entire cybersecurity process, both within an organization and through a supply chain. One more question. Yes, the question is a tool available for a hosted on-premise solution? And yes, it is. We were providing two mechanisms for using this tool: a cloud-based solution where any organization can sign up, create an account, register, and use the tool. But if for some reason they want to have it behind their firewall or self-host it, they can self-host it as well. That's another option. If there aren't any more questions, what I'd like to do is have my colleague, Chantel Hoagland, come up and talk to you about our ideas for partnership and collaboration going forward.
All right, the next step, the business. So as we prepare to transition this technology to market, we've already laid a lot of groundwork on the marketing communications side. The next two slides come from what I call our minimum viable Marcom plan. It includes the usual assorted slide decks and elevator pitches and use cases, digital and print media, website, and even some early media coverage. But now, as we approach full technology launch and commercialization, we're preparing two new programs for engagement. The first is our users group launch cohort. Pending a vetted application process, volunteer members of our launch cohort will be offered a deep discount on their license. We'll provide complimentary training on the tool and on compliance-related issues. In exchange, the cohort will provide us detailed feedback, but we'll also be able they will also be able to request features and functionality that benefit their own businesses and their own needs. Let's see. So the second program is what I would describe as a somewhat non-traditional channel partners program. This project, as Glenn mentioned earlier, it began as a collaboration between industry and academia. And virtually everyone's mission in this venture is to continue to stimulate the adoption of cybersecurity best practices. So perhaps it's not surprising that our channel partners will also be a little more unique than other technology businesses. So here's what we envision. The first is we envisioning partnering with supply chains and with prime contractors. We'll want because they will want to standardize reporting across their supply chain. They'll want to subsidize the cost of compliance management for their subcontractors. They'll likely also want to aggregate numbers or metrics to monitor the status and reliability of their own supply chain. This will be essential for their business. The second we envision is partnering with professional associations, certainly professional associations related to cybersecurity, but also associations that support industries that are coming up against new regulations or that have need to evolve their cybersecurity practices, not unlike the manufacturing industry. We envision partnering with security consultants for obvious reasons. They have clients that they need to serve. We can incorporate aspects of their needs into the tool in the future. And the last one, which was the most surprising to me, is educators. We've actually been approached by several colleges who do workforce development. They're interested in licensing the tool for classroom education for the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. So I know we have some work to do before the tool is ready to address the needs of the energy sector, but I wanted to make sure that you're all aware of these opportunities for engagement. I have no doubt that these opportunities will evolve, and perhaps there are people out in the audience that even now might be interested in coming aboard and helping us and joining the partnership. Is there anything more, Glenn, that we want to add?
No, thank you. Are there any questions at this point in time?
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All.